The upcoming release of the new Star Wars series Andor is bound to create another round of excitement surrounding this franchise. Of course, there are many stories in the Star Wars universe to tell, but each new iteration calls attention to some of the existing properties. In particular, there will be renewed attention to some of the many Deus Ex Machinas that have cropped up in the various movies. Some of these particular plot devices seem to solve various problems of the story, but, in reality, they created several more that could not be so easily resolved or explained away. The saving of Chewie. There's no question Chewie is one of Star Wars' most beloved characters. After all, he is the only one of the original group who survives to the end of the saga. In The Rise of Skywalker, he is seemingly killed when the ship he is on explodes, only for it to be revealed that he was on another ship the whole time. While this certainly was a source of relief to those who didn't want to see this iconic character killed off-screen, it opens up a whole host of other plot problems. There was, of course, no sign of another ship, and it robs the moment of what was supposed to be an emotional epiphany for Rey, who finally realized just how dangerous the Force could be. Leia suddenly learning how to fly. Leia is one of the best female characters in Star Wars. From her first appearance to her last, she was a magnetic person, someone who inspired both those in the fictional universe and in the audience. Even so, the revelation that she could fly, which occurs in The Last Jedi, is a Deus Ex Machina of truly staggering proportions. One can't help but wonder just why this ability never manifested itself before, as she has certainly been in life-threatening situations prior to this one. Unfortunately, sometimes the plot requires a twist that doesn't make any sense. The return of Palpatine. Though Star Wars has created some great villains, none have achieved quite the status of Palpatine. Though it was probably inevitable he would ultimately make a return, in The Rise of Skywalker, he becomes the ultimate Deus Ex Machina. Though the novelization does some work to help explain how this came to be, he had clones created of himself. It is still a plot hole that opens up a number of other contradictions. Most prominently, it makes little sense for Palpatine to have worked through Snoke, only to so easily dispense with him once he'd seduced Kylo. Order 66 is one of the most shocking events in Star Wars lore. At the same time, it is, in its own way, a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, in that it is an abrupt explanation for the relative paucity of Jedi in the original trilogy. Most glaringly, it seems to come out of nowhere. There are, it has to be said, almost no indicators from Palpatine or others as to how this was planned or how it could be put into effect so quickly. Though the prequel trilogy explains some of the elements which would come to play in the original 3 movies, this is one which raises more questions than it answers. Weak points in Death Star. Second Death Star. The Death Star is one of the most important ships in Star Wars. In both of its iterations, however, its destruction is implemented by a very notable Deus Ex Machina. The first is an especially strange one, as the design flaw that enables the ship's destruction seems to come out of nowhere. Though Rogue One tries to explain some of this, it truly does defy logic that the Empire, which had already succeeded in dominating so much of the galaxy, should have allowed its ultimate weapon to have such a fatal Achilles heel. Rose saving Finn. In some ways, the relationship between Rose and Finn is one of the most important in The Last Jedi. In that sense, her saving him from a pointless self-sacrifice seems a useful Deus Ex Machina, but unfortunately, it ultimately creates a number of plot issues. These become very apparent in The Last Jedi when Rose is once again relegated to the sidelines. Her decision to save him, and the bond they continue to forge, seems rather pointless by the time the third movie takes place, making more than one viewer wonder just what the purpose of the entire friendship was in the first place. The constant changing of what the Force can do, given that there is always something more than a little magical and mystical about Star Wars, it makes sense that the Force would play such a major role in its various storylines. Very often, however, it becomes a deus ex machina of its own, with its own internal logic sacrificed to whatever the plot happens to require at a given moment. This can make for very distracting viewing even for fans of the series. It is, after all, hard to pay attention to what is happening when one is distracted by the way that the central magical force actually works. Midi-chlorians' few changes to Star Wars lore have been as divisive as the abrupt invention of midi-chlorians in the prequel trilogy. This is, essentially, a lore deus ex machina, as it provides a more concrete explanation than that offered by Obi-Wan in the original trilogy. At the same time, it is also something of a plot hole that opens up a whole host of questions that the saga ultimately doesn't explore. It begs the question of why, for example, Obi-Wan didn't explain them to Luke in the original trilogy, since they were clearly such a key part of Jedi lore and understanding of themselves. The concept of a Force diet as the sequel trilogy nears its conclusion, it's ultimately revealed that both Rey and Ben are part of what's identified as a Force diet. To be sure, this is the definition of a deus ex machina, in that it is a last-minute story change that allows the heroes to attain an unexpected victory against Palpatine. While it solves this particular problem, it raises a whole host of its own. Why is this only now being revealed as something that was possible? Surely, if this was a phenomenon that was possible, someone in the story, perhaps Luke himself, would have made a point of mentioning it. The killing of Snoke, though Snoke was supposedly the big bad of the new trilogy, this very quickly was thrown out the window in The Last Jedi. He was, in fact, killed by Kylo Ren, who then assumed his position as supreme leader. While a deus ex machina, this whole incident created many major plot holes, many of which were exacerbated by the revelation that Snoke was merely a puppet for Palpatine all along. In particular, it made many viewers and fans question the necessity of even creating this character. He became very superfluous to the story that ended up being told in The Last Jedi.